Welcome to Healing and Made Free with Janet Boynes Ministries. Thank you for listening. Janet will be talking about her struggle with addiction, alcohol, drugs, eating disorders, unwanted same-sex attraction, and living a homosexual life. Janet has survived all those things by the grace of God. Janet's not a doctor, she's not a therapist, she's not a psychotherapist, she's not a licensed counselor. Janet is an ordained pastor and wants to show you God's promises, how God has set her free, and how you can be set free. What He has done for her, He will do it for you. If healing and freedom are what you want, you have come to the right place at the right time. Let's get started. Here is Janet Boynes.
I always say this every time I open, but I really mean it to my heart to have David pick up, a psychotherapist, actually almost have his doctorate. David, welcome to Healing and Made Free.
Thank you, Janet. It's always good to be here.
This has been long time overdue. David is on my team. He is helping and has helped and wrote a curriculum with me, him, and Jonathan Alexander, and he speaks at all my conferences. It's just an honor to have you as a part of my team. I just love you dearly, and you have such a wealth of knowledge. So let's get this party started.
Thank you. Okay.
David, why don't we start off with telling my audience who really don't know who you are, just a little bit about yourself before I start asking questions.
Yes. Long story short, I years ago, about 15 years ago, I left the airline. I was in the West Coast, and I left the airline that I was working for many years, and I decided to follow in the footsteps of my mentors and become a psychotherapist, and specifically, almost always focused on men and boys who are dealing with same-sex attractions that are not inborn. They're caused by major trauma in childhood and unmet needs, and a huge sense of deep inferiority about their bodies, their gender identity, things like that, that have caused those symptoms, as I call it, of homosexual feelings. But also is the same story because we're getting a lot more transgender or gender dysphoric people. And so it's expanded to that. And so having gone through some of those issues especially in my younger years, when I didn't know anything. And I was one of those kids that was abused by next door neighbor, and that kind of story myself created a lot of issues and whatnot. Well, when I became a therapist, I realized that because everything fell into place. Every single thing fell into place. That was about 2004 when I started. And I got my second degree in psychology and followed in the footsteps of my mentors, supervised, and became a full-on therapist. And that started about 2008. Mm-hmm. And I've since moved on from there and have lived at a couple of different states. But now I seem to be here, God willing, permanently. And as I look back now, and I began to realize this, probably 10 years ago, especially, I do feel I've been providentially led by God to do this work, because so many opportunities and so much help and the opportunities, the experiences I've been given just help me know that, wow, I really believe I'm on the track that am intended to be on. Mm-hmm. And so since I am a man of faith, I have that viewpoint, and I believe that I'm never going to retire. God willing, I'm never going to retire, never going to give up. Who knows? I might keel over one day in a therapist chair, but whatever, it's fine. It's just I get, and so I get to. I've had expert training and become an expert in my own right, and now I train therapists of how to do the more unique new therapy that's having such a massive impact, even more than before, over the past several years, including clients from other countries. And then occasionally I'm speaking and training in other countries as well. In fact, it's kind of wild, but who knows? For the second time, a huge group of Muslim therapists in Istanbul has asked me to come speak for them and train them again this coming December. So it's quite unusual to be there in the middle of Istanbul and train all, but they believe exactly as Christians believe in terms of gender and sexuality. So that works. And so that's where I'm at as of today with a
I'm
busy
excited.
private practice.
Yes, you do have a busy practice. You said something that I want to go back to before we move on to all the things that you're doing today and how a lot of these happen. Yes, you were, I'm assuming, molested when you were a young boy.
About
David,
5.
about 5 years old, and a lot of times, a lot of children don't remember that they were molested or they know something happened to them. They didn't quite put it together, but then they come out with, I was born that way. Does that have something to do with their thinking in I'm born that way because they don't remember something else tragic happening to them when they were a child?
Yes, that has something to do with it. So that's a piece of it. But the larger piece or why of that is, again, in my experience, it's because they're, to say it in a kind of a succinct way, they get lost in childhood, whether it's abuse or neglect, which is a form of abuse, not really attached to primary role models. They're underneath these issues are lost little children. And of course, there's all kinds of spiritual implications for that. But in terms of these, homosexuality and transgenderism, it's that lost sense of self that they're desperately trying to connect to, and a lot of that is unconscious because children and then later on adults, if that's all you know, are more apt to just suddenly go after what's pleasurable or peaceful, they think is peaceful or attractive. And so they're constantly searching for their identity. To me, the reasons are more about this is all I know and it feels pleasant or pleasurable. And so if I'm searching for my identity, that must be who I am. So that's the story on that.
David, you said inborn. A lot of people hear that word inborn, but they might be afraid, like, I don't know what that means, inborn. What do you mean? Will you tell my audience, what do you mean when you say it's an inborn?
Inborn, in a more scientific explanation that fits with the general population as well, what we mean by that, what they mean by that, is that it is absolutely, unquestionably genetic. In other words, there must be something that we're born with in this brand of sexuality, even transgenderism, that is different from everybody else and is immutable. In other words, unchangeable. Very similar to race. So, for instance, when you point to a person of another race, it is right there in our genes where the race card is, so to speak. It's right there biologically. But guess what? It's not there in terms of transgenderism and homosexuality. Now, are there other aspects of in the womb hormones and influences? There can be, but the science has not been, even the most liberal folks in the world will publish that there is no proof of inborn or genetic causality at all. Even the APA, American Psychological Association, has on their website, we don't really know what causes homosexuality, but we think it has something to do with genetic influences and environmental. What do they mean by that? Well, they mean what we believe about that it's caused by environment, which means emotional environment, upbringing, certain circumstances, abuse, unfulfilled needs, basically trauma. So that hopefully explains that.
In a nutshell, it's trauma. And I know a lot of people recognize trauma in their life. And some people that are listening might say, well, David, I've been through a lot of trauma and I didn't go into homosexuality. I didn't transition. I didn't have gender reassignment surgery. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And that takes a little bit of a deeper thought provoking what's going on with that. There are many traumas that the human race experiences, but they all don't manifest in the same ways. For instance, now this isn't true exactly, I'm being very generic right now, but what would be a typical that I see in the office every day is a typical homosexual experience or lifestyle that where the trauma of, let's say, for whatever reason, death, divorce, a lot of personal problems themselves with their fathers, those male needs for affirmation, approval, and affection, which are the basis of forming the security of the self, the male self in that particular case, when those things aren't met, here's one example of the difference. Guys who don't have homoerotic feelings as a result of that, to turn that trauma feeling into a pleasure, they're the ones who usually still want to be like their fathers. They ache for their fathers. The guys who are dealing with the manifestations of homosexual feelings as a result of that kind of neglect usually, although not always, usually feel completely detached from their father. They don't want to have anything to do with them. They don't realize it at the time because they're small children, but they, in essence, become defensively detached from maleness. Well, the problem is you're hardwired by God for the male experience, boyhood to manhood. So if you, for whatever reason, are not fulfilling or have not fulfilled that programming, so to speak, enough, then the body will compensate automatically. That's where the temptations come from. If you can't find the masculine experience inside your own body, the only other way is to turn maleness into a sexual object, which is outside of yourself, because the subjective experience is too hurtful, too painful, unknown, that kind of thing. So the other guy who's, let's say, heterosexual, who had the same neglect, his issues probably because he still wants to be with his father or get something from his father, if he has issues at all, it'll usually manifest in terms of other compensations like alcohol to numb the pain, drugs, that kind of thing. There will always be some kind of pleasure experience that a guy will compensate for those deeply unmet needs, but it does in a generic way. You know, there's different manifestations. It seems to fall on that dichotomy I just described.
David, that is amazing. Those of you who are watching this at this time or listening to it on my podcast, please share this with someone that you know that is dealing with, homosexuality or transgenderism or been through some type of trauma in this particular area. At the end of this, we will have David's information. We'll have him share his information on how you can reach out to him. If you can't reach him, reach out to me and we'll connect the two of you because he is so experienced, especially in this area when working with men. He works mostly with men. And so there are men who have been raped, who's been through a lot, who needs to deal with that might not have went into homosexuality. David can help you. David, you work with a lot of men. You work with a young man that you and I are very close to at the moment. And in talking with him and talking with other boys, we talk about the fathers, how important it is for fathers to have a relationship. And most men that I talk with, they said, well, I don't have a relationship with my dad. He was a jerk growing up, or he was on the road all the time, or he was a drunk, or he was that. He didn't spend a lot of time with me. And so they don't have a relationship today. And now dad is upset because now their son is like, I'm a homosexual, and dad is trying to fix it. What can we say to dads and sons, two-part, might take you a little longer, on how to deal with this in the family?
Janet, you're asking some of the most insightful questions that are absolutely essential. Thank you. I just have to say that because I don't get this deep of questions a lot of time. Well, I do, but not. You just phrased it perfectly because that's because
we work together.
World. Yeah. That's real world stuff right there. Right. The rubber meets the road in situations, a few of them, and that's one of them. So here's what I do and what I would do. First, you have to determine who's really motivated or not, because people who come into therapy and you find out one or both aren't really that motivated. Maybe they get shamed into coming or whatever. It'll never work. I tell them up front, I'm a very direct person. Now, I also have a lot of intentional patience and compassion, but I'm also choosing to be very direct sometimes because I am obligated to make sure as much as I can that I can't waste their time and money. And I will tell them that if they're not really motivated. Okay, but let's say they're motivated. They really want to be there. Okay. I'm very succinct. with what they're going for, because I don't want to waste time, and I don't think they do either. I go right to the heart of the matter, and I basically tell, let's say they're sitting there, I basically tell father and son, do you guys want to know what it feels like to be attached to each other and really have love between you two? Most of the time, what are they going to say? No. Yeah, they're going to say yes. Well, then I say, okay, then this is going to happen. You're going to have to listen to each other. You don't have to agree with each other all the time at all. But what you have to do is listen to each other and be able to reflect back what you see in each other, no matter what happens, and stay out of shame, judgmentalism, spiritual shaming, whatever it is. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, you're going to probably, sometimes I'll say, you're probably, that's going to be against the very way you guys grew up next to each other for the last 20 years. So it's going to be a sacrifice. Are you willing to sacrifice for your kid, Dad? What's he going to say? No. Are you willing to really talk to your dad and tell him what you really feel like? Tell him not be, you might be afraid of him, but are you willing to take a risk, a healthy risk, and express how you really feel about him and what you believe in, that kind of thing. And then it goes into the third area where I show them how to choose words that really, they end up becoming more or less masters of communication skills. There are ways to express things. There are ways to express anger, hurt, pain that are much more conducive to healing than your general outburst, for instance, although sometimes outbursts happen. So those are the things I tell them. And if they can navigate through those, either immediately or down the line, that's probably going to be successful. And just that attachment or that reattachment emotionally tends to result in automatic changes down the line anyway.
I like what you said, David, because when talking with either one thing you don't do, if you're working with the son, you won't work with the father, or if you're working with the father, you won't work with the son. You'll send it to, one of your other partners or other counselors that you work with or psychotherapists. But I love where you said, in so many words, you have to respect each other as you're sharing, because the son might say, well, Dad, I felt this way. And Dad will go, no, that didn't happen. Well, no, Dad, that's not your feelings. These are his feelings or her feelings. This is what they felt at that time. This is their experience. Yours might be totally different, so we don't always see things in the same light. And so what you're saying to fathers out there who have children that are living a life of homosexuality, a homosexual life, whether male or female, respect what your child is saying, because that's their feelings. That's how they feel. Even if you don't feel that way, everybody's feelings are different.
Yes, Janet, you're exactly right. And look at what that leads to, even more potentially. No one can potentially successfully. No one can guarantee anything, of course. But if you really want to help your child see the light, or in fact change, where are you most likely going to be successful at that? In defending yourself when son is angry or pained and is expressing that and saying, well, I did the best I can, which is what I get a lot at first. Are you going to be successful in that? Or are you going to be more successful, likely, of really listening to your kid and being able to say back to him, you know what, I get how you feel. I'm glad you told me that you're so angry. I can see the pain in your eyes, son. That is a game changer. And if parents and sons can't do that, I know right where the roadblock is, and we don't go anywhere until that roadblock is busted through. And then what forms is this automatic attachment emotionally, because they're hearing each other, even though they may believe different things. And that attachment, which is one of the primary causes for these issues in the first place, will actually result in probably much better things later on, even if it doesn't help instantly.
David, from talking with you, the importance of dad not only apologizing, but how important is it for a dad not to make excuses on why he did what he did, but say, son, can I share with you a little bit of what I went through? And I believe I carried that into my marriage, into my adulthood. I didn't get the help that I needed, and I apologize. And I want to work on our relationship, I know it's going to take time because sometimes dads try to put a round circle through a square hole. It ain't going to fit right now. You got to allow your son to heal as well as you're getting healed. Am I on base there? Am I off base?
No, you're right on target. That's another manifestation, a specific where that's got to happen. That, in other words, you just manifested in your own particular way, basically what I'm saying. That needs to happen. That is one of the ideal responses for a parent, a father specifically, to know how to handle this situation with his son. And it takes something else, by the way. And I know you do this all the time, so I'll do it now. Let's apply that spiritually. This is where patience must come in. So if you want to be a great father, you'll be patient, forgiving, hearing, listening, attaching. All that is God's design.
I love what you just said about listing all those things. My first guest, I'm podcasting all day until 3:30, and he had things right in order. He said, Janet, even though I have a big business of real estate and all those type of things, God comes first, but my family does not come before my job. And a lot of times dads feel that, I got to go make a living, but it winds up coming before their kid. Even pastors are guilty of that. It's like, God, then, hey, the church is first, and your kids and your sons and your daughters are seeing you do all those things for the church that they are wishing you would do with them, but they come third instead of second. And I find that that's a problem a lot of time in our homes. And I'm sure you hear that a lot talking with
Yes.
a lot of boys that you meet with on a regular basis.
Yes, that's correct. And if those people of faith who are, I'm assuming, out there listening, they need to know that. If you're a grandfather or a father in a leadership position and you've lost control, so to speak, in some way of your children, and if you notice that your children are going off into lifestyles that you're surprised at, if you notice suddenly after many years that your child is just inching away from you, doesn't really want to talk to you a lot, there are reasons for that. So you, as leaders, you've got to find the way back. And of course, things are different if you're talking about sons, let's say, who are already 30 years old or 40. I get that. But especially if you're talking about young people, even though you may not have been raised yourself as a father with that model, and there should be some understanding, compassion for that, which is what I do for fathers as well. I don't condemn them. I wouldn't dare do that. But I help them recognize that, wow, they didn't realize what's going on. But the key is, especially when you have a child that's young or youngish, you're still responsible for your child's upbringing. The bottom line is the father is still responsible for a boy's growth into manhood, primarily. There's an age in which he's responsible for himself. So that has to be talked about as well. But if you don't know fathers, if you're leaders of spiritual works, you're going to have to find out. And I'm giving you some exhortation right there to don't put up with, I didn't know. You do something about it. You ask for forgiveness, and then you move on.
David, I have to do a part 2 with you. Those of you that are listening, you need to share this with someone, because if you have a son that is dealing with homosexuality, father's not involved, their dad need help, David is the person to reach out to. David, would you tell people how can they reach out to you? We're going to do a part 2, so I want to make sure we have your information on part 1 and part 2. Will you share how somebody can reach out to you?
Sure. And thank you for doing that. I appreciate it. My website is probably the best way because you get more a chance to explain some details when you contact me. So you can email me through the website, which is davidpickuplmft.com. It's David Pickup, just like it sounds. Then the letters L as in Larry, M as in Mary, F as in Frank, T as in Tom.com. Through there, you can email me. I do suggest through there you go to the website because it's got all this information and books to read and articles as well. But there's also the email page, and you can, and as I say on the website, you'll hear back from me within 24 hours. So I'll whatever the answer is, I will get that email immediately. And if you need help or have questions, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you, David, so much. You are listening to psychotherapist, soon to be Dr. Pickup, and I hope you listen to part 2. Thank you so much, David.
Thanks, Janet.
Thank you for listening to Healing and Made Free with Janet Boynes. Acts 10:34 says, God is no respecter of persons. God doesn't play favorites, which means what he has done for Janet, what he has done for guests on this show, he will do for you too. If you are struggling with anything, do not hesitate to reach out to Janet Boynes Ministries. They will do their best to help you any way they can. Go to the website, janetboynesministries.com. Janet loves you, and most importantly, God loves you. Have a blessed day.